You'll be shocked, but the fact that all those Native Americans depicted in movies and TV shows as dirty animals is complete nonsense. In reality, it was the colonizers and cowboys who were the real stinkers. Today, I'll tell you how society was organized in some tribes, why young Native American men shied away from women, and how sweet ladies killed everyone in sight in wars. And in the end, you'll learn shocking facts about how girls lived in nomadic tribes. Enjoy the show! Let's imagine an average woman in the 16th century. She's a lady of certain beauty standards, wearing uncomfortable clothes, forced to serve her suitor, and in fact had no rights. And I'm talking about the lucky ones born into noble families. But in ordinary villages and towns, things were horrific. Not only were women and girls more like objects to establish connections by marrying them off, but they also had absolutely no voice. This shocked me. But dear ladies couldn't even choose their own husbands. And who would have thought that among those very Indians, often portrayed in a negative light, women's rights were much better? For example, women in the Iroquois tribes were responsible for special rituals and ceremonies, engaged in religious education of the society, and also had their voice within the community. Moreover, among the Indians, it was women who organized the fundamental processes of society's life, while men dealt only with basic things, like food gathering. Doesn't it seem completely different from the image that has formed in our society about Native Americans? But I found the main difference between European society and Native Americans, because in the major cities of Europe, women had no rights. They were often oppressed sexually. It often happened that girls actively avoided their husbands, whom their relatives arranged marriages with. But in the Kagaba tribe, it was completely the opposite. Adult men literally ran away from women. Why? Because they had a very specific ritual. Young men who wanted to become adults and start a family had to spend the night with the oldest woman in the tribe, and moreover, they had to fully satisfy her. And if they failed, they were doomed to further trials. A terrifying ritual, isn't it? Well, in families, all women were always initiators of sexual life. It even got to the point where men had to literally run into the woods to special shelters from their beloved ones. Now, some not very decent vulgar phrases started to mean something else to me. But credit where it's due, women, besides managing the tribe's life, also participated in wars. For example, the Omahas, Cheyennes, Pawnees, and Sioux in these communities lived real Amazons. And in wars, nobody intended to spare girls, because everyone knew they were a real pain in the neck. Because they fought alongside men and even posed much greater dangers. Why, you might ask? Because it was the lovely ladies who stabbed the knives into the backs. Nobody took them prisoner precisely for this reason. Although in Europe at that time, women could also strike unexpectedly, infecting with syphilis, for example, or some other terrible disease. And do you think I'm exaggerating? Not at all, because personal hygiene was hardly known at that time, just as medicine was hardly known. I'll tell you later about how progressive Europe took care of its body. But for now, I'd like to highlight one very interesting thing. In medieval Europe, during special days, girls used a very unusual painkiller. Its composition included honey, wool, and nettle. Yes, you heard it right. That very plant that painfully stings even through rubber gloves. So Native American women who didn't engage in such nonsense became a tasty morsel for American colonizers. And that played a cruel joke on them. With the arrival of colonists, significant changes began in the attitude towards women in the Native American communities themselves. Men, seeking privileges or material benefits from the new authorities, began to practice the sale of women and girls of their tribe, or renting them out, disregarding their opinions and desires. And this was even in those tribes where young men ran away at the sight of a girl, although the practice of renting women among the Indians was perceived as establishing friendly relations, and initially did not seem excessive. It's like a peace pipe, but a woman. Indians viewed the birth of a child from a white person as a pledge of establishing mutually beneficial cooperation and a guarantee of the tribe's safety. Some tribes, such as the Cree, even allocated girls for rent to white colonists. In general, it's not surprising to me at all that many colonists married Indian women. However, there was a paradox, which was that the opinions of the girls were not taken into account. But thanks to these marriages, diplomatic relations were established between the colonists and the tribes. Some claimed that without the participation of Indian women, it was practically impossible to resolve any issues with the tribes. Apparently, men, tired of matriarchy and war, happily got rid of two problems at once. But even such actions didn't really help the natives. The Native American tribes, which once numbered over 2,200, have now been reduced to approximately 550. They mainly reside in reservations within the United States, mostly in the western part of the country. Some reservations are located in the north and center, but there are few on the east coast of the USA. Among the largest and most well-known tribes today are the Cherokee, with a population of over 330,000, and the Navajo, where about 220,000 Native Americans reside. There are also other relatively large tribes, such as the Sioux and Chippewa, each with a population slightly over 100,000. But not all existing tribes have official recognition. Over the past decades, the Bureau of Indian Affairs has reviewed over 150 petitions, but official recognition has been granted only to a few tribes. Upon recognition, tribes acquire the status of sovereign nations, which grants them certain rights, including managing their territories, taxation, and establishing their own laws. And this is very sad. But even in reservations where tribes have sovereignty, there are problems. Many Native Americans are unemployed, family incomes are low, and living conditions are poor, lack of electricity and education, and high prices for products due to infertile lands. This leads to addictions to alcohol, diabetes, obesity, and high mortality rates among Native Americans. Most young girls are forced to move to cities to work on the gambling business, which has become the main source of income for many tribes and reservations, considering the absence of tax restrictions on building casinos on their land. Of course, there are those who earn a living from ethnic crafts and honor the traditions of their ancestors. But overall, the youth is diminishing. Most representatives of Native American tribes prefer to live outside reservations, struggling with poverty and only returning to visit their families. And why do you think almost no one supports Native Americans? But let's get back to the topic. Family structure among the natives was very unconventional for those times. Native American tribes, for the most part, practiced monogamy, but also allowed polygamy, where a man could have multiple wives, provided he ensured their material comfort and met the intimate needs of each. Interestingly, if the first wife pleased the man so much that he was completely happy, he could ask his own sister to become the second wife, even without the first wife's consent. Yes, with his own sister. Such practices were considered normal and were reflected in Native American legends and traditions. One legend told of two sisters who lived alone. The first man they saw descended from the sky and taught them everything related to agriculture and cooking. Therefore, now every Native American can have two wives, and it may seem lucky for them now, but as you may have already understood, it wasn't like that in reality. But what surprises me more is the following fact. A woman could be a temporary wife if she wasn't the first. The status remained until she found herself a husband. These traditions allowed women to avoid the status of old maid and not remain childless, and which was accepted by all members of the tribe at that time. Attitudes towards marriage in Native American society were practical and similar to modern times. Young people could live together, and if the relationship didn't suit someone in the couple, they would end the marriage. Thus, it can be said that Native Americans were ahead of their time in many respects. After all, the traditions of civil marriage appeared in civilized society only in the second half of the 20th century. One very tender example of attitude towards women among Native Americans is the tactics of European colonizers. Colonizers realized that women were highly respected in Native American tribes, so they often captured them to make the Indians stop the war and cooperate with them. For example, in 1868, George Custer's regiment captured about 50 women from the Cheyenne tribe. In order to free them, the Indians agreed to leave the territory and go to the reservation. The Sioux tribe, in turn, had a special attitude towards women. We believe that a woman is much closer to God than a man can ever be. Women who give birth to life, created, they are more sacred and spiritual than men. They are more important. And I also want to note that even the right to divorce was granted not to men, but to women. For example, if a man returned from a hunt and his things were outside the hut's door, it meant that his wife decided to kick him out. Interestingly, the man had no right to protest and was obliged to gather his things and return to his mother's hut. It's not very pleasant to come home from a business trip and find out that your home no longer belongs to you and all your things are lying in the trash. Although, wait a minute, there's something in common with modern society in this. Well, it's time for the most interesting part. On the Wild West, Native Americans weren't unwashed savages. It was actually the Pilgrims, the colonizers, who didn't even wipe their own backsides. However, it's important to remember that people of that era had a completely different worldview. The vast majority of Pilgrims didn't engage in any hygiene practices, and it was considered normal. At that time, water wasn't associated with cleanliness, and the term cleanliness was exclusively linked to clothing. Therefore, a person in neat attire was considered absolutely clean. Unpleasant body odors simply didn't catch the attention of the early colonists. A cowboy was supposed to smell like manure and horse. Fleas and lice were also considered the absolute norm, and that really shocks me. The concept of cleanliness in the 1620s was also deeply infused with religious beliefs. Many saints intentionally subjected themselves to suffering on earth, creating non-healing wounds and disregarding hygiene norms. Meanwhile, American Indians, who loved to bathe in water bodies, looked like savages to Europeans because a group of Indians standing under a waterfall seemed immoral and unethical to the colonists. While Native Americans saw a connection between water and cleanliness, the colonists only saw a deviation from medieval traditions and blasphemy. Not to mention the ritual of wiping dirty backsides when these savages even bathed. Amazingly, European Americans only began bathing in rivers, lakes, and the ocean at the end of the 18th century, and now they proudly boast about their cleanliness and neatness in movies. That's why they liked Native American women so much. I would also like to emphasize that even amidst their warrior-like nature and uncompromising spirit, Native American women remained women, beautiful and well-groomed, without masculine roughness. Photographs taken at the turn of the 19th and 20th centuries vividly demonstrate their magnificent traditional clothing and passion for adornments. I'm not even talking about their perfect posture and mischievous gaze. In the culture of many tribes, women preferred to wear shirts adorned with fringe, embroidery, beadwork, shells, and feathers, as well as skirt dresses that accentuated their gracefulness. Together with men, they showcased a wealth of accessories: earrings, necklaces, rings, bracelets, and other adornments, each of which was a special symbol of their tribe's history and culture. Even at present, many elements are borrowed by fashion houses. I'm not even talking about various body decorations like piercings, rings, and chokers. It's also important to mention their skincare products. Girls from Native American tribes often used natural cosmetics, various moisturizing oils, hair dyes, and homemade shampoos. Some recipes are still used in modern cosmetics. But not everything was so progressive and ideal for Native American women. There were also some strange customs and prejudices. For example, during their special days, women became unclean and weren't allowed to be near men, especially during meals. There's a legend about an Indian named Wisaka who bet his grandmother before a meal and forbid her from eating, explaining it by her uncleanliness. Moreover, women were forbidden from hiding their menstruation because, according to the Indians, if an unclean woman eats with others, it angers the gods and can shorten the lives of all family members. It's important to note that caring and tender attitudes towards women were mainly characteristics only of settled Indian tribes. Among nomadic Indians, the lifestyle implied a more contemptuous and even cruel attitude towards their women. So, not all indigenous people were lucky. Women in such tribes bore all domestic responsibilities, took care of the children and their spouses. Sound familiar, right? In some communities, older women were seen as burdens and received even less food than other tribe members. There were no romantic comforts for old women as in settled tribes. It just wasn't expected. Even the question of feeding such women seemed like an unnecessary burden, as they couldn't contribute to the tribe beyond their useless presence. Another contradiction was the desire to increase the tribe's population on one hand and the use of active birth control methods on the other. Indians of many tribes used various herbal infusions and magical rituals to prevent conception. They often resorted to interruption, especially during periods when hunting couldn't provide for the entire tribe, and the appearance of new hungry mouths could worsen the situation. It was precisely because of this attitude that women of settled tribes fought so desperately during conflicts, having no desire to change their accustomed way of life. It's sad that such a unique and interesting culture is fading into oblivion with each passing year. Thanks for watching.